it was discovered that 70% of the Israelis believe that they belong to a chosen people. And this I cannot accept. That the Bible is not a historical book, not the First Testament and not the second one.
Humanity's family tree may need some pruning. The discovery of an ancient skull has revealed clues that could shake up the accepted theories of human evolution.
Unfortunately, religion has this other component where it goes into, instead of what the sociologists might call pattern transcending activity, or mental activity as well as behavior, it's into pattern maintenance activity. And it becomes a tool of the state and the society and the conventional culture to control people.
So we came to the conclusion that, in fact, Moses and Akhenaten were one and the same people. And that how can we have an Egyptian king who have a mixed blood with the Israelites?
You're listening to Canary Cry Radio. Here's Basil and Gons.
Hey everyone, welcome to Canary Cry Radio. My name is Basil.
And this is Gons. Welcome to episode number 70.
70.
70.
Yep.
Just keeps going. Never ends.
Does not stop.
We have an interesting show for you guys today. This is probably one of the more challenging shows we've ever had.
Yeah, so strap in and get ready.
Yeah.
So as we go through the conversation with our guests today, I'm just going to give a fair warning that there will be times when you want to just reach through your podcast player and strangle mostly probably me or Gons for not addressing certain things at certain times. And the reason that we did not get into big debates at the time is because here at Canary Cry Radio, we are here to hear people out. And so we gave our guests the chance to present themselves relatively congenially. And, there'll be a lot of things that you'll want to hear more about or hear Gons and I's opinion on. And just stick around till the end, because that's when we'll pop in and talk a little more.
Right. And after the interview itself, we will more or less go over, not every point, but, a basic general overview of a few of the things that are mentioned during the conversation. Just kind of like how Erica Gray, the interview, sparked some heat. You guys have been commenting quite a bit on the website. And so, again, once you guys listen to it, you can jump into the comments and start posting your thoughts and share links. And we will also share all kinds of links and stuff.
On the show notes.
Yes.
Okay, so make sure to do that at canarycryradio.com.
Yeah, and some of you guys have been saying that you haven't been able to play the MP3 on the website.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been trying to ask the Blueberry PowerPress people what's going on, and they're not really being too helpful. So, sorry about that, everybody. I apologize.
Working on it,
Yeah.
Internet, man.
I know. But if you can't listen to it on the website, you can still download it on iTunes or Stitcher or TuneIn Radio or whatever podcatcher.
Or. Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess maybe we should just get into it here.
Let's do it.
Here we go.
Today we have a couple special guests. Karen Hudis studied law at Yale Law School and economics at the University of Amsterdam. She worked in the U.S. Export-Import Bank of the U.S. from 1980 to 1985 and in the legal department of the World Bank from 1986 to 2007. She established the Non-Governmental Organization Committee of the International Law Section of the American Bar Association and the Committee on Multilateralism and the Accountability of International Organizations of the American Branch of the International Law Association. She's a whistleblower, and recently she's been making the rounds, blowing the whistle on the corruption of the world economic system, suggesting that it is in fact run by a small group of corrupt, power-hungry figures centered around the Federal Reserve. Our second guest is Dr. Edward Spencer, who is a graduate of Stanford and Yale Medical School. He's done residency in neurology at UCSF. While he had contributed to the discussion about the hidden mysteries and conspiracies in the past, he took his fascination full-time after 9/11, and he began studying the Hebrews as part of his investigation. And in 2012, Ed learned that a human-like hominid had existed on this planet and that skulls had been found in diverse locations, including South Africa, Malta, Peru, and Russia. And he's now ready to talk about what he calls a new twist on the aliens. So Karen and Dr. Ed, how are you guys doing? Thanks for being here.
Woo!
Thanks for the introduction. That was great.
Yeah,
I'm doing
thank you.
fine.
Yeah, you guys are, that was our very first Canary Cry Radio double introduction. I don't think we've ever done that before. So there you go. You guys are going in the record books.
70 episodes. That's great.
I know, we made it this far, so what could go wrong? So Karen, you are so far away right now. Thank you for being on with us all the way from the time zone that you're in.
Yeah, I'm in Tokyo. As a matter of fact, I have to confess that I couldn't get the day straightened out, and I stayed up at 1 o'clock yesterday, too.
My goodness. Well, yep. Time zones are difficult. Time is it's a pretty squirrely thing. And Dr. Ed, thank you for being on the show. Good to hear you, buddy.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're just going to go in the order of Gonza's introduction there. Karen, let's talk about you for a second, all right? So, really briefly, tell us, kind of in your own words, what your deal is, where you came from, and kind of where you're at now.
Right. I've been working for the last 15 years on corruption in the international financial system. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that I didn't understand just how corrupt it was. But I did know what the rules were, and that the World Bank is at the very heart of the international financial system. It was set up in 1944 to try to reconstruct Europe after World War II. And then after that, it tried to help developing countries grow their economies. And also the International Monetary Fund, which is right across from the World Bank in Washington, is supposed to make sure that the international currencies are, that they don't get out of whack. So if something's wrong with the World Bank and the IMF, you better believe it's very wrong.
Right.
And the thing about the World Bank is it's not your average international organization, which is to say it's not one country, one vote. The votes are weighted in accordance with the size of the economies. And so, and they also have a board that are supposed to manage. So it's not, it's not like the shareholders come together once a year. They're right there. And the other thing that's different about the World Bank is that they issue bonds on the capital markets. So if their financial statements are wrong, you have the securities laws that you can use. And so what I did was first I tried to do what the in-house lawyer is supposed to do, and that is I went up the corporate ladder, and then the Dutch representative on the board wrote a letter asking for the audit committee to look into my allegations of corruption. And that didn't work. I'll tell you what happened. Paul Volcker came in, the French who was chairing the audit committee, that's Pierre Duquesne. Instead of helping me out, he asked for an inquiry into something called the Institutional Integrity Department, which was a goon squad that would take out any staff member that reported corruption.
Wow.
Yeah. So Paul Volcker did a whitewash, but that didn't that didn't work because 17 of the people inside the Institutional Integrity Department complained. And what's really interesting is that there was a group called the Government Accountability Project that liked to claim it was helping whistleblowers. Well, they took down their blog that said that the Volcker report was totally a whitewash. But in the meantime, a group called Common Dreams kept that thing up. So that'll show you whether GAP is really representing whistleblowers, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just what I've discovered. Because of the depth of the corruption, you find groups that are gatekeepers. They're there not to help the whistleblowers, but to entrap them and pass the information on.
Wow, it's kind of like they're just faking you out.
Well, what I ultimately learned is that we've got something called state capture, which is to say that the institutions of government are working not for the people, but for the vested interests. And in this case, who is the vested interest? There's a group in the Federal Institute of Technology, which is the best university in Europe, in Zurich, Switzerland. 3 mathematicians modeled the capital markets. They used accurate data. And what they found out was that it's not that you've got 10 banks that are too big to fail. You've got one mega bank. Because what this group did, and their power was 10 times more than they were entitled to. It's just that they were sneaky and they didn't tell anybody. And they took the directors and had them identical. So it's called interlocking directors. Mm-hmm. So what you've got one mega conglomerate that is in control of 60% of the annual earnings on all the capital markets and 40% of the net worth of these companies, through this little trick of the way they structured the control. And they didn't think anybody was going to find out about it, but we did find out about it. That study was published in 2011, and since then I've been working together with all kinds of whistleblowers. I don't know if whistleblower is exactly the right word to use. I think the best way to describe it is sting operation, because we're professionals, many of them inside the World Bank, others of them professionals that understood that what we were actually dealing with was whether humanity had a future. Right.
Okay, so you talk about this interlocking directors thing. Is that technically illegal? Is that the case, or was this something where it's just not conducive to a quality organization helping out the world?
Okay, the word illegal is a very good word to look at, because what I ultimately found out was that the legal profession was in on the scam. The very the leaders of the bar were there to punish anybody who was going to try to straighten things out. And the lawyers were actually in cahoots. It turns out that our Constitution in the United States is not in effect. There's been a state of emergency. The lawyers have used gobbledygook to confuse everybody.
Right.
It turns out that the courts are not doing what courts are supposed to do. It's been martial law. So, and the provisions of the Constitution that said that when 2/3 of the state legislatures asked for a constitutional convention, that's Article 5, there would be one. Well, the Congress didn't do it. The reason why? Because the banks, this cartel that I'm telling you about, in 1871, that's when they turned the United States into a company. They incorporated the states. And then they said that the debt that was owed to them was going to be secured by all of the people. And they took away the people's constitution. They took away their courts. And now they've been taking away their houses through a huge scam. So when you say, is this illegal? What I've recently done is I've been calling the American Bar Association on the carpet, and because one of the terrible things about this corrupt group is they bought up all the mainstream media, and then they told people who were trying to inform everybody about what kind of corruption was going on. They called them conspiracy theorists and tinfoil hats, and then you couldn't get your story because we've been mounting a campaign. We've been using the internet, and I can also say that the alternative media, 2/3 of them are also on the take and are really mainstream media in the disguise of the alternate media, but we've actually exposed all of these shysters. We've exposed them, and there are people who have been trying to discredit me and the rest of the whistleblowers, and they've all of a sudden realized that they've just simply outed themselves because what's made me very confident that we are going to win is the fact that the World Bank, I told you, it's in the very center of the international financial system. Well, it's got all kinds of neat bells and whistles because of that. You've got software. People are trying to sell their software in World Bank projects. And one of the people that was trying to do this is a political scientist named Jacek Kugler, who had designed something called a power transition model that was actually in the Department of Defense. And he came to the World Bank, and this was in 2004, and I modeled rule of law, and it predicted that we were going to build coalitions for the rule of law, and that's exactly what we have done. And one of the whistleblowers is Elaine Colville. She's in the United Kingdom. We have gotten our testimony up on the UK Parliament website. When that happened, there was a 90 to 95% likelihood that we were going to break through, and that's exactly what we have done. And we are. I was just telling Ed, we're just about ready to clean up and close down that banking cartel, and all of the crooks and hypocrites are now exposed. It's really great.
I want to ask a two-part question here, or maybe Gons, why don't you ask your question first?
Well, I just out of curiosity, those of us who sort of look into, the conspiracies, if you will, those of us who have been marginalized as the conspiracy theorists, we run across labels, the New World Order, the Illuminati, things like that. What do those titles mean to you? Is there a connection with all of this?
Oh, there is an absolute connection. I'll tell you what it is, and this will, I think it'll blow your listeners' minds.
We like to do that.
Okay, there is a thin layer of people. Some people call them the 1%ers, and this group has been identified. I'm just going to walk over and get the book. What I'm doing here is I'm in one corner of the room. I'm in a guest house, and the person who's on the other side of my room doesn't like the fact that I'm having these conversations at 1 a.m. Okay. This book is called The Elite Control Everything of Significance by Robert Galen Ross Sr. And what he did was he got the names of these groups that have been selling out everybody, everybody down the road. They themselves knew what they were doing. They knew that there was this group that was in control. Okay? So you've got the Bilderbergs, that's groups of elite. There's a Skull and Bone Society, that's at Yale. Sure. Both Ed and I went to Yale, but right. We were not Skull and Bonesers.
Right.
Okay. There's the Council on Foreign Relations. There's the Trilateral Commission. That's Japan. And anyway, yeah. So this book says exactly who these people are. And they thought that we weren't going to, they thought they were, they had tenure for life, that nobody was going to take down this network of control, but we have. And one of the issues that people are going to have to figure out is, what do we do with these traitors?
Now you say that you took down this this network of control. What do you mean by that? Do you mean that those organizations you just mentioned are no longer in power, or what?
Yes, they're no longer in power. I'll tell you what's happening. There's a lawyer who, by the way, history is going to be totally rewritten, because anybody who was good has been painted by our propaganda media as bad,
right,
and anybody who's bad has been painted as good. you get the picture? So Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, what he did was he took the world's wealth. There's more wealth than anybody knows about. There's gold that's many, many, many times what people say is the amount of gold on this planet. And he put this in trust for humanity. And there's a German banker lawyer named Wolfgang Struck in the Philippines. And Wolfgang has the signature authority for that gold and its precious metals. It's art. It's all of the treasure of this world. Fabulous wealth. Humanity is very, very rich. And what's happening is, I'm using the Bretton Woods institutions, which were given a role to supervise that this trust was going to be benefiting humanity. And we are forcing those banks to cough up the world's wealth. They didn't think anybody was going to force them to do it. They didn't think we were going to find out about it, but they were wrong. And all of the countries of the world understand, and I'm here in Japan because the Japanese are going to be the first. And we are going to be minting our gold coins, and that means that there's no country debt. There's no interest on the debt, because people don't realize that our tax revenues have not gone to pay for the roads and the expenditures of our society.
Right.
Instead, what we've been doing is we've been selling drugs for that. We've been trafficking women and children. Mm-hmm. That's how we have financed our society.
Right.
And the interest on the debt has gone to the City of London and to the Vatican. And that's not going to happen anymore. The banks are not going to take our tax dollars. We are going to have gold currency that's going to be minted, and there's not going to be any interest on the debt.
Right.
And those banks owe us the money. It's not that we owe them the money. And we are going to wind those banks down.
I have actually come in contact with one other person who has told me about these things that you're speaking of. And I didn't, this person didn't have the credentials that you did, but they were also talking about this sort of resetting of the world's wealth through this trust that you're talking about.
Well, many of the people are trying to grab the world's gold. Not many people are really trying to make sure that it goes back to humanity.
Right.
So most of the people that you hear about it they're just there to try to claw it back for those crooks.
Right. Well, so what exactly does that mean, and what kind of timeline can we look for? Or are you working towards?
Well, I was just telling Ed, I'm drafting the agreement with Japan. I'm in touch with the senior officials in the government. I wrote to the Council on Foreign Relations, and I told them to get ready to step down, and they better do it peacefully.
Right.
And if they don't, they are going to jail.
And how do they respond to that?
Stay tuned.
This is very interesting for all of us, and I know you've talked about some of this before as well, but I know that the rabbit trail goes even deeper here, and what we can touch back on some of these things as we move along in the conversation. But I know, part of the reason why we wanted to have you on, Karen, and of course Dr. Spencer, is because of these apparent Homo capensis, these beings that allegedly live in the Vatican and all this stuff. where's the bridge from all of this to that conversation? And Karen, can you start that off and maybe pass the ball to Ed?
I'll give you the chronology of how I got to know Ed. And I'm not saying that these critters live in the Vatican. That's not what I'm saying at all. Yeah. What it is that there was a pharaoh named Akhenaten.
Yes.
Egyptian,
Mm-hmm.
And that's Abraham. And his wife Nefertiti, that's Sarah. And the Exodus, that was the Egyptians. Akhenaten and his entourage were wandering around Egypt, and then they went to Canaan, and they had to wait until they had enough forces for a military operation, and that's when they ended up, with the Promised Land. That's what, and so. That's what that is. And if you look at the pictures of Akhenaten, you'll see that he had a strange-shaped skull, and so did his wife, and so did his kids. That's because he was not human. He was something else. And I found this out because there's a producer named Edmund Drille who was trying to get his movie, The Banksters Made Off with America, distributed. And so he interviewed me, and then he told me about Ed, and he told me about a couple of other people. And, we've just been, we've been trying to tell everybody what it is that Ed found out.
Okay. So what you're saying, Karen, about Ed, and Ed, we'll get you in here real quick. Maybe we should actually just start with that, because there are a lot of questions with what I just heard from Karen. So let's just do just that. Dr. Ed, why don't you give us a short intro to yourself there, and then maybe start in on some of that interesting stuff that Karen was explaining.
Well, thank you. You gave my bio there. I am a graduate of Stanford University, studied chemistry, Yale Medical School, and residency at the University of California in San Francisco. And then I practiced neurology up in Sonoma County. I tell people that I didn't know anything until about 1996, when I began to study hidden power. Then actually I got into that through the Shakespeare authorship question. I saw a front line and, found out Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. And just went from one thing to another, becoming a semi-pro after 9/11. And I was persistent in trying to find out how things work and how the world is in such a mess. It's very important to just not study words, but to look at the structure of what's going on. And the world is a complete mess, and our brains are a complete mess. And how did it get that way?
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So what was the stuff that Karen was talking about with the Akhenaten?
Well, that came sort of at the end that I learned about Akhenaten. Actually, Karen told me about Akhenaten. What it amounted to, or what the way this came down, is that I brought Eustace Mullins out to the Bay Area in about the year 2007, and tried to get a speaking tour going with him. My friends and I took care of him, and we talked to him a lot. And I read a book that he had written, Mullins' New History of the Jews. And what this book said was that something in the Hebrew had taken down Babylon, Persia, Greece, Egypt, and Rome. And this is consistent really with an introduction to the protocols of Zion, in that there is essentially a secret elite hiding amongst the Jews. On reviewing the introduction to the protocols, it's very clear that most Jewish people do not know about what amounts to a secret elite amongst the Hebrew who were directing the operations. Most Jewish people feel that they're being criticized because of anti-Semitism, a very mushy concept, but in fact, a lot of things are being done sort of behind their back. So that's how I got started really in pursuing her. That's how I got back eventually to the to Akhenaten.
Okay.
So what it amounts to is, if you're looking at this, how is it possible for the Hebrew to sort of have come into existence as master agents, master agents of subversion?
Right. Hey, Karen, real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt. We can hear you typing back there. Is that you?
Sorry about that. It is, yeah.
Okay. Just light fingers, please. Okay, Ed, please continue.
So it didn't make any sense, really. That the Hebrew people are brighter than most, and that they have an organization known as the Mossad, who has this motto: by way of subversion, by way of deception, thou shalt do war. The question is, well, why and who? And so the whole thing doesn't make any sense. But it did pretty clearly show that there is a very long history to the problems of the earth and or the problems of humanity on the earth. And it began, on the order of 6,000 years ago. You can trace it back to approximately then. What I then discovered was a book by Charles Hapgood entitled Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. And Charles found out that the entire Earth had been mapped during the Ice Age. Now, none of us learned this in school. And apparently, if somebody tries to teach it to you, they get into trouble. And that's not unusual. If somebody tries to let information out, they're clamped down on by the powers.
Right. Well, that is quite a paradigm shift.
You mean the maps?
Saying, yes, that the Ice Age was mapped during that time would be quite a paradigm shift for somebody to...
Yes, and it's pretty clear from the maps that the sea level was 400 feet lower, and there was no ice cap over the Queen Maud Land coast of Antarctica. And there's a mile of ice there now. So this is very, very interesting. And this has actually been confirmed by the Air Force in New Hampshire. They were friends of Charles Hapgood, who was a professor at the Keene State Teacher College. And they confirmed his work. Couldn't explain it. They also noted that whoever built these, created these maps, knew spherical trigonometry. So this is a paradigm shift, as you might say.
Sure.
Now, I don't think now that the Air Force would be allowed to do that. People were more innocent at that time, and somehow or other, this contact took place, and that information, they exchanged information. I think that would be very difficult.
Okay, so you're saying that where did these maps come from? How did the people get to know about them?
Well, this is a Piri-Reis map. The maps are considered to be copies of copies of copies. Piri-Reis was a Turkish admiral who had found the maps and was using them. Someone in the Turkish Navy, I believe it was, brought the map to Washington, D.C., and there, a friend or a colleague, or at least somebody who knew Charles Hapgood, saw it and noted that this was an extraordinary find. And it sort of began from there. They started exploring and looking around. Hapgood went to the Library of Congress and went through all the maps and found a number of maps that shouldn't be there. Antarctica was mapped in one of these maps, which were of circa 1531 about. And of course, we didn't discover Antarctica until 1818. So that's how that got going. And Hapgood studied the maps, and he used his students to help him. And this is, maybe the way education should be, because they worked as a group studying these maps. And then Hapgood wrote his book. Hapgood was considered sort of a strange character at Keene State University. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty clear why, because he was doing the right thing. So, but this then gave a time frame. They expanded the time frame remarkably, because the last ice age lasted on the order of 100,000 years. Then about, I think, 17,000 years ago, a global meltdown began, and that was quite an uproar for the Earth. That lasted about 10,000 years, and then things quieted down on the order of 7,000 years ago. During the global meltdown, there were enormous floods all over the place. And a good example of this is the scablands up in Washington State. This, I think, Lake Missoula is in eastern Washington and adjacent states. This is ice age lake, ice lake, dammed by ice, by the glaciers. And numerous times the ice dams failed, and there were enormous floods that rushed down over the scablands, scouring the earth out and down the Columbia River Gorge, or over the Columbia River Gorge. And these floods are described as 500 cubic miles of water rushing out in 24 hours. I'm sorry, 48 hours. And at that time, the future site of Portland was under 400 feet of water. And of course, these were not the only glacier, not the only ice lake that was doing this. And so there were enormous floods all around the world. And they were described as, this Plato describes them as coming up from the ocean, and that the very rich people and the intellectuals by the sea were swept away, and the only survivors were the rude shepherds up in the mountains. There were also tremendous volcanic activity because of the incredible weight of the glaciers being removed from the continents. And I think it's called isostatic action, or forces move the continents up, and there was enormous volcanic activity. Mm-hmm. So and this sort of fits into this, we have to take care of the earth. We can't, they check to make sure you're not moving gravel. This actually happens up in Northern California. They're going around looking at the various ranchers and seeing what they're doing, as if we can control the whole thing. But in the Ice Age, it was this incredible destruction and uproar, and the global meltdown.
Right. Okay, so we've got the sort of Jewish elite that you mentioned. We've got a Turkish guy who found Ice Age maps, and then we've got the Ice Age melting. How does this all fit together, and where do we go from here?
Well, we know the world is a complete mess. And the sort of the references I use as standards for this, statements by John Kennedy, J. Edgar Hoover, and Carl Jaspers.
Right.
The fact that the Earth is the world, or our societies are run by conspiracy, and it's a very subtle, relentless conspiracy, and it's incredibly nasty. So how did it get that way? Well, it's clear that the Hebrews are involved in some way in this, from the writings of numerous people, the Synagogue of Satan, what Eustace Mullins and others have written, that something is going on there. And then that we also have secret societies out there, Skull and Bones, the Masons, the Knights of Malta, who knows? That everything is essentially a lie. And the question is, how and why would it be that way? And how did it get going? What the Ice Age maps showed is that we can't easily define the beginning of this, that it certainly can have been going on more than 6,000 years, that it can be going on, many tens of thousands of years. And this then begins to make more sense in that this great mess in which everyone is sort of pushed to do the wrong thing. A little bit, maybe not a lot, but you just do a little bit wrong, and then it adds up. And a billion errors adds up. Everyone drills a little hole in the bottom of the ship, and pretty soon it sinks. And so it made sense that this all flowed from a very long time back. So then the question is, well, who did it? Who could have organized this over these many thousands of years? Was there a secret society of men doing this? Well, I mean, where is the continuity? And that's not obvious at all from what we know. There's a degree of continuity with the secret societies, but we're talking about continuity of 20, 30,000 years.
Okay.
So the next book that came along, the next bit of information, was this book by Lynch and Granger, Gary Lynch, Richard Granger, neuroscientists who wrote this book, Big Brain. And this is they talked about the future of human intelligence, but then they started with Homo capensis. And Homo capensis was found in Boskop, South Africa, in about 1913. And a couple of workers found this fragments of a skull in a ditch, and they thought it was rather strange, and they fortunately took it to a museum nearby, and when it was recognized as a remarkable find and studied. And what they found at that point was that it was like a human skull, only the brain cavity was approximately 30% larger.
Right.
And that's Homo capensis, or the Boskop man. And fortunately, very fortunately, a renowned paleontologist by the name of Robert Broom studied this skull. I think he actually went to South Africa to do it. And so he did a formal paper, a very good description of it all. And this entity, or this being, this hominid, I guess this Homo capensis, had this very large head, had a very massive jaw with large canines and incisors. And this is significant because in many reports, they'll talk about something like this, and they will give it a tiny jaw. The gray has this tiny little jaw. I couldn't eat a blueberry without assistance, but this Homo capensis had, a massive jaw with these very powerful anterior teeth, ripping teeth. Something curious happened then with Homo capensis. This was naturally a finding that really excited the paleontologists, and British paleontology got very excited about this. And but then something came along which was even more exciting and wasn't all those many thousands of miles away in South Africa. And that was a Piltdown man. And so that completely took away the attention. It shifted the attention away from Homo capensis. And everybody, went wild over the Piltdown man, who turned out to be a total hoax. So that's sort of interesting.
Right.
That Homo capensis is found, and then a hoax stops it. There's also more to the Homo capensis story, and this is that he's kind of hard to find. I'll actually send you the paper, the Broom paper. But so that's a very substantial piece of work, and it's one of many studies that Broom carried out. So he can't be ignored easily. So if you can't ignore him, what do? You hide him. So there's a book, Cremo's book, Forbidden Archaeology, I believe it is, and so there's a lot of work by Robert Broom in there, but this paper, 1919 paper on Homo capensis, isn't there. And then there was another book that has recently been published, which is supposed to be the total comprehensive book on hominid paleontology. Okay. And it's not there. There are other Broom papers there, but this paper, which one might really consider...
Hold on a second. We got something going on somewhere. Gons, is that you or is that with Karen?
No, I don't know. It sounds like paper or something in the background.
Yeah. Karen, are you there?
I'm there, but I'm not doing anything. Not my fault.
Huh. Interesting. Well, was that on your side there, Ed?
No.
Huh. Okay.
But that always happens when we try and do this.
Yeah, we need that. Mr. NSA man, if you could please mute your microphone while you're listening in. You're really being an interruption. Okay. Well, let's continue. Okay, so we've got the elite Jews, we've got the Ice Age, and now we've got archaeology conspiracy hiding Homo capensis. Where do we go from here?
Then we have Lynch and Granger, these gentlemen who have done, these neuroscientists have done very good work, who did calculated what might be described as an IQ. That's the words they use, the sort of brain power of Homo capensis, with a brain 30% larger. And they calculated the increase in the association area based on the increase in size, and they came up with an average IQ of 149, with 10 to 15% of the population being at 180 or more. So immediately, you have a candidate for Earth Mapper, I would think.
Okay.
that this species mapped the Earth. So there we have a candidate for Earth Mapper,
right? With
Homo capensis, with a large brain hominid, and then there's nobody else coming forward. There's no human society that we can point to that mapped the entire Earth during the Ice Age. Also, it turns out that there are underwater megalithic structures around the world. The sea level rose 400 feet, but these structures are there. And I think Yamaguni, Japan, was the first one that was found. And these are interesting in that the pros. The establishment scientists look at these things and they say, "Oh, the ocean did it, and this and that." The ocean can cut steps into the concrete or whatever. Whatever they do. Like, there's always that. So we know that a lot was going on during the Ice Age, and we know that this could from the standpoint of the Hebrew elite. which could easily have been the training grounds for the Vatican and everything else. Can't have done it. Can't have just suddenly appeared and have had this extraordinary knowledge and proficiency, and they really are pros. So it looks like it came from the Ice Age, and it looks like that this large brain hominid, who is way smart, or at least has a powerful brain, we can't really say it has a human IQ, but it's really has a powerful brain, can be responsible for this. Now, then we find out that there's more. There's more. There are also beyond Homo capensis, there is a conehead type hominid, and now the conehead has not been formally studied by anyone like Robert Broom, but a fellow by the name of Brian Foster, who has Hidden Inca Tours, has done tremendous work on this and has found these skulls in a little museum in Ica, Peru. And this is by Paracas, Peru. And these skulls, these cone heads, are most impressive. And then some of them even have tags of residual skin and this auburn red hair.
Right.
And then there was this article, with this website. It has much information. Okay, this website has been taken down. I have it in this paper, and I'll send it to you. But it's gone now. Well, that's evidence, that something's going on. When everyone gets interested, it goes away.
Yeah, and just as a side note, Brian Forster worked with one of our colleagues, L.A. Marzulli, who was down in Peru, digging up those cone head skulls. So we've heard about them, and we'll touch on some of I guess the differences in worldview of perhaps what's going on. But go ahead and please continue.
Okay, so Brian does tremendous work, if I get pronouncing his name right, and he avoids establishment funding because he knows that's the kiss of death.
Right.
That's putting duct tape on your mouth. So then we have another skull. So this one, I can't remember the numbers on this one, but I think the brain is bigger than Homo capensis, and it's a true cone head. Instead of having two parietal plates, it has one parietal plate. The orbits are about 20% larger, and it has these occipital frame and really high in the occipital region. This is not human. You can tell this pretty clearly by looking. Then it has these large, heavy jaw, large incisors and canines, and few or no molars, which means that it eats meat, that it doesn't have molars to chew its veggies.
Right.
So that's what we've got. I mean, with a very powerful brain, and we have these skulls all over, and so naturally, you would expect the DNA specialists, the geneticists, to jump on this, but they don't. They ignore it completely. I mean, you look at one of these things that's got skin and hair on it, and, they go have coffee, or maybe it's tea. I mean, I sent a letter to Brian Sykes at Oxford, and, of course, I never heard back. I sent him pictures. Who knows? I mean, so it's very strange. This is the phenomenon of the academic brain, the academic mind,
right?
Which is something we're going to have to study in great detail, because the university, as far as I can tell, is like it's a big black box full of little bright lights, each one in a little black chamber. And the brilliance does not communicate. You see a crack here and there, and a light shines out.
Right.
And certainly Lynch and Granger are shining lights amongst this blackness. Well, so we have two. We have at least two types. We have two species.
Right.
One formally studied with just a big pumpkin head, and apparently there's a lot of these shaped skulls have been molded by trephining and molding the skull in infancy. It's like I think one of the references in this marvelous website that disappeared mysteriously.
Right.
Is that they just it was a long time ago, but they were really good at neurosurgery.
Right.
Like every mama could take this pumpkin head and turn it into a swept back, more fashionable skull.
Yeah, our listeners will remember in an episode with L.A. Marzulli, he had mentioned a lot of this. So a lot of the more scientific-y names of bones and things like that, surprisingly, a lot of you out there will remember what those are. So please continue.
So we have two species.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, maybe there's more. I don't know.
Sure.
But certainly there's Homo capensis and there's the conehead monoparietal plate variety, and we know that they are very, very bright, at least in some way.
Right.
We know that they know mathematics, like spherical trigonometry during the Ice Age, and that they could do a lot of things. Now, the maps are not charts; they don't show depth of oceans. Mm-hmm. They're not like something taken from space. They're not like modern maps or charts at all. At least they've either come down to us, and you can see some errors. One of them is you can see that they made a mistake regarding and mapping of Antarctica, of the Arctic Circle, and I think the 80th parallel. And so Antarctica is much larger, but if you make that correction, it shrinks down. So they're maps of stuff that we shouldn't be there, but they are. But they're not like something came from outer space and took a picture. This is important because everything is shifted. The extraterrestrials, the UFOs, which are basically fog, smoke and mirrors to cover up what is really here. What we know unequivocally is here because they left their skulls all over the place. Well, do you have any questions at this point while I reorganize myself?
Well, I see you're giving us a lot of puzzle pieces here, and they're starting to come together a little bit here. We have established that your theory is that there are a group of hyper smart pre-human species.
Why are you saying pre, Basil?
I believe that's the term that he used at the beginning of this talk.
Let me jump in for a minute, okay?
Sure,
and
please do.
Try to tie this together.
Okay.
Because it is really like putting a puzzle together, and so there's a UK lawyer who I've been dealing with for 30 years. I believe he's with the UK Intelligence Service, and I was telling him recently about the fact that we believe there's this Homo capensis and also this big brain species.
Sure.
And so this 1% group of humans, some of them know and are dealing with these beings. And so what I heard from this person is that they like this group likes to beat women, and they go to the BDSM watering holes to hang out and have fun.
Right.
All right. Now this guy was not lying. I know him. I didn't expect that he was going to be that frank.
Okay.
I want to just jump in because obviously, there is a little difference of worldview. I think there's a lot of interesting things that you guys bring up, and obviously, none of us has an exact clear answer of what our history is and stuff like that. And I agree largely.
This is not history. This is not history.
No, I'm talking about.
This is what's going on.
No,
this is what's going on today.
Okay.
This is real.
Right. So what I'm saying is with the things that Ed brought up with the Ice Age and everything else leading up to today, I agree that there's a lot of cover-up going on, and there's a lot of misdirection and
this
deception.
Is not a myth.
No.
This is not a myth.
I said misdirection.
This is absolutely not a myth.
No, I said misdirection, not myth. Misdirection as in cover-up and hiding the truth, essentially. So
look, if truth is not comfortable, you have to work on it until it is comfortable. You're not going to undo truth.
Sure. No, I totally agree with you. And so what I want to get to, though, is Dr. Ed had mentioned this idea of the Hebrews being sort of responsible for starting this whole underground thing, keeping all of this information hidden.
No, that's not correct.
Okay, go ahead. What was the... Dr. Ed, do you want to come in and sort of...
Well, I'm trying let's put it this way. What I'm saying with the way this all came together in my mind was that there's a history of something going on. The history is not clear, but there's been a subversion going on for at least 6,000 years.
Right.
And we can find that there could well be a origins of the subversion during the Ice Age.
Okay.
That makes more sense than
As
it
in
suddenly appeared.
As in Homo capensis was alive during the Ice Age.
Yeah.
Did the mapping of the Ice Age planet survive the Ice Age and has continued to subvert and carry out their agenda in the modern world?
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what the agenda might be, because we can look at the financial system. The agenda is control.
Okay.
They are using the international financial system, charging interest on countries' debt to maintain control. What they're doing with the currencies is they're not allowing people to choose their currencies. They have laws that are legal tender laws. They say, if you don't use our currency, you're not allowed to use any other currency. Okay, so they're maintaining control. Now let's shift to religion, and this is the point that I was about to make.
Okay.
You have got maintaining control over humanity's thought processes, because, and also divide and conquer. You've got major religions that are fighting each other. You've got the Muslims being, we're being told that they're bad people, and so this is not so much that. And you've got the Vatican and the Jesuits that are killing our presidents. So it's not. It's an equal opportunity bad vibe.
Right.
For the human spirituality, instead of our rabbis and priests and clergy are somehow they've got some kind of agendas there. How is that? And if you see that there's a control slant in our finances, it's even worse in our religions.
Okay. So Homo capensis in the modern day are in control or is somehow influencing the economic situation through, I'm assuming, the World Bank?
They're not influencing.
Okay.
No, it's not the World Bank. It's the Bank for International Settlement.
Got it.
Those are the central bankers.
Okay.
And they have infiltrated the World Bank, and they've perverted it.
Got it.
And it's done in a very hidden way. And what they've also done is they've taken the military and they've used their secret societies, the Knights of Malta, to get very key positions so that those senior officials are betraying our military might.
Right.
There was a town hall meeting with Martin Dempsey, who's the chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I asked him why the military didn't want to strengthen the dollar and do what John F. Kennedy was doing. John F. Kennedy, 10 days before his assassination, was going to take back the right to currency being issued for the Treasury Department so we wouldn't have to pay interest to the Federal Reserve. And when you pay interest to the Federal Reserve, that means that your money is going to the City of London and it's going to the Vatican.
Right.
And John F. Kennedy and also Ronald Reagan was going to do that. That's why Hinckley shot him. Mm-hmm. And then what happened was Reagan was not taken to the hospital. He had to promise that he would do Rome's agenda. And then after that, he recognized the Vatican. The Vatican was not recognized after they murdered Lincoln. Okay, so this is the religions are and not all of them. Obviously, you've got good clergymen, but there's rot at the top.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, and we largely agree with that sentiment. I'm just curious because, I know you guys don't see, the scriptures as something that is truthful. I believe you, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm, putting words in your mouth. But do you guys see something like, the New Testament as something that is totally a control mechanism? Is that something you guys believe?
No, of course it's not. What you have is you've got real prophets. And there's been an editing job. The King James Version was shortened. And before that, with the Nicene Council, they threw away all of the subversive stuff that they didn't like. They edited out.
Sure. I disagree with you on that point. We have the written documents of what was declared at the Nicene Council, and some of that.
No, you don't.
No,
they were burned. They were burned.
Well, we can look back on the history.
No, the really subversive ones were burned. They were burned. There were 300 books that were burned.
So you're saying that because that there's a control layer on top of this, that we can't trust certain aspects, let's say, of the New Testament. Is that?
I'm saying that you have been manipulated with your spirituality for a purpose, so that you could have a little handle and be manipulated. And if you don't want to admit it, you don't have to admit it, but that is the fact. That is the truth.
And in what way has this manipulation aided in the agenda of Homo capensis? Like, what could have been in an allegedly burned copy of an excluded book of the Bible that would cause some trouble for their agenda?
I am not going to sit and speculate about what was burned. How would I know? I do know that it was burned.
Here's where I'm going. You say that things were excluded from the New Testament in order to protect the agenda of Homo capensis. Now,
that's correct.
Yes, and I think it's a legitimate question for me to ask, what sort of thing would this be? It's a very general statement. And so even just in your words, I would like to hear what the possible, reason would be for that.
Well, I mean, there are things that are very, very straightforward that you can see. The rapture is something that never existed and then all of a sudden was put in there. Okay, that was added. When something's added, it's very easy to identify. And some of the people have been talking about how with UFOs, which may not be ET, extraterrestrial,
right,
that you could stage something and make people frightened and think that something had happened that was spiritual when it was really just a hoax. And the word rapture is allowing people to be bamboozled and a hoax to be committed. And we do know that people have been admitting that was an agenda item. And I can tell you
who's admitting that?
I can give you the name of this guy if you hold on for a second.
Okay.
But in addition to that, you have technology that is able to hypnotize people remotely. And so a lot of the experiences that people say they had may simply be the fact that they were hypnotized. I can tell you that there was a fellow on the internet who claimed that he was the risen Jesus Christ, and he wanted to include my name in his video. And he was very insulted that I would not allow him to do that, and I told him that was blasphemous.
Right.
So
sure.
they are absolutely using people's religious feeling to bamboozle them. One of the other things is when you've got this confession in the clergy. That was something that now, of course, you can spy on people, but before they had that, that would be a way to maintain control. There are all kinds of things that maintain control.
Sure.
Right.
That were deliberately put there to maintain control.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's just interesting to me that there are so many passages that talk about don't let anyone deceive you. Let no one deceive you. There's a lot of that going on in the New Testament, in Ephesians, 2 Thessalonians, and of course, Revelation and stuff like that. Are you coming from I guess you can say like a reductionist materialistic worldview where do you believe that there are supernatural agencies that could be, I guess the Homo compensis explanation is very much rooted in that sort of standard Darwinian evolution concept.
No.
I'm speculating here, but what is your?
No, I believe in spirituality. I believe in the prophets. I have, I'm not supposed to sit here and witness, but I absolutely do believe that that Jesus Christ is the Savior. Okay, but it's not in the way that we believe. I don't think it's. I think it's to tell everybody that they themselves, if they try very hard to connect with their spirituality, can do wonderful things.
Well, I wouldn't quite agree with that particular version of the gospel, but for example, there's a topic that we haven't touched on really that, from the biblical perspective, there's a passage in Genesis 6 that talks about who are labeled the sons of God, who came unto the daughters of men, and they bore children.
That whole business about Nephilim is garbage and trash. It is wrong. It is stupid.
Okay, why do you say that?
Because it's a way of taking away the focus on the Homo capensis that are here.
Uh-huh.
Sure. From my perspective, it seems more like it's revealing some of those things, not so much covering it up.
No, because it's saying that that the Homo capensis are coming from female Homo sapiens, and they are not. If for some reason it was possible to have a child from a mating with a Homo capensis, that would not have been fertile because the DNA is too different. Just like mules are not able to have offspring, they're infertile.
It seems to me that there are some very slight differences between your theory of the Homo capensis and the theory of the Nephilim.
No, you are wrong. Don't put words in my mouth.
I'm not putting words in your mouth.
You are trying to say that everything in the Bible has to be true, and I'm trying to tell you that is trash.
Excuse me,
that
Karen.
Business about Nephilim is trash.
Okay, Karen, I'm trying to make a comparison between what you say about Homo capensis and what many believe about the Nephilim. And that
but I'm telling you that is incorrect. You're putting words in my mouth.
I'm not putting any words in your mouth. I'm simply making my own comparison.
Nephilim have nothing whatsoever to do with Homo capensis. Nothing at all.
Well, I will say that our colleague and friend Elia Marzulli has spent a lot of time studying the skulls and actually has many samples of the skulls and has devoted his career.
His career is wrong. His career is wrong.
And he's wrong. The point. Okay, it sounds like you're not open to even listening to
That's correct.
what we
I'm
have to
not.
believe.
I don't want people to associate me with the idea that Nephilim have anything whatsoever to do with Homo capensis. I am categorically saying that that is incorrect.
For that the skulls that are being compared to both of these theories are the same skulls.
I am trying to tell you that I do not want to participate further, and it's kind of late for me, so I've lost my patience. I'm sorry, I'm out of here. Good night.
Thank you, Karen, for your time. Good night.
Well, what's happening?
Well, if you would like to continue, we are very open.
Well, I will continue. I will wrap it up.
Okay,
First
sounds
of all,
good.
I put together a theory. This essentially is a theory that big brain hominids are in control. And to do this, I had to deal with the Hebrews. But you're not supposed to actually do anything with the Jews. You're not even supposed to use the word, really. Everything is anti-Semitism. But to actually study the stuff, you have to be relentless in going through it.
Sure.
And so the question is, so you have a theory, and if you have a theory, you should be able to make a prediction on it. And so the prediction I would make of what I've known, that there had to be a contact somewhere with the Jewish population, with the Jewish elite, really, with the big brain hominids, probably the coneheads. So you look back, and all of a sudden, what you find is Akhenaten. So it's, an amazing contact that would be anticipated, that there would be a contact, and then it turns out that it's Akhenaten. And so that opens up a lot of avenues for study. Why that Akhenaten was busy, trying to doing his best to destroy Egypt.
Right. Now, before we go off that topic, where's the evidence as far as this? Because I've heard of the Moses-Akhenaten comparison, and there's several authors and several books that have come out in the last, I'd say, 25 years or so that discuss this possibility. What do you consider as the strongest piece of evidence that would suggest either from the from the biblical record or from the Egyptian record, whichever is the best example of that being true?
Well, there are several books on this, and I don't have them right. If I can come up with them, they're one by two rabbis that have Akhenaten being Abraham. Mm-hmm. And then there's another book that has Akhenaten being Moses. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's any significant, if it makes a difference from my standpoint, because it means that a large brain hominid was right there in the organization of the Jews. Mm-hmm. So that anticipated, that predicted event actually took place. Okay. At least on the basis of several books. And then, of course, there's what was Akhenaten all about? They've been much of the material, art, structures, whatever, have been destroyed. And the thought was, well, this is because Akhenaten was so very unpopular with the Egyptians. But I think another possibility is that they're attempting to destroy evidence of what Akhenaten really was and what he did. So then there's legitimacy of where I am. Something started in the Ice Age and then it came down, and everything is done to confuse our mind. You could say that, we live in a matrix of total lies. If what William Casey said, if, the CIA's work will be done when everything the American people believe is false. I mean, what was he to do that? So there's nothing but lies everywhere. So where do the lies start? Well, if we go back to Noah and the flood, if you look at the Noah story and the great biblical flood, what that says is you don't need to look back beyond this point, and nothing to see there, folks. This great ice age meltdown is not something you need to pay any attention to. So it looks like the flood story could be designed to prevent examination of what came before. This is very much like the UFOs and the ETs sort of block looking at other options. So the question is, how much of the Bible is been written simply to confuse us? Now, what I was talking about, what I've called is harsh philosophy, which is what you really want to learn at this point in our history is what it's going to take to survive, to keep from going extinct. And because there are real forces there to do this. Because the motive here of all of this is that these big brain hominids control the earth during the Ice Age. They controlled us. And they overtly controlled us. They weren't hiding in tunnels made by the Air Force like maybe they are now. Right. And they want to have overt control again. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. And I actually just finished reading Our Occulted History, written by Jim Marrs. And he really looks at some of these issues and looks at the Sumerian accounts, the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis, and a lot of the earliest cuneiforms and written accounts that we do have. And of course, he ties it to this idea of a potential, ancient alien, ancient astronaut connection. But with the Ice Age, I guess the question is, we know that established academia, the established institution of, the scholarship, they have a certain agenda. They have a certain, worldview that they want to promote, whether it's to cover up or it's, I think a lot of it is tied to money and what gets funded, and who knows what the ultimate agenda is. But one of the things that Jim Marrs brings up in his book is that there's a possibility that even this idea that the Ice Age was so many thousands of years, even that could potentially be part of the whole, system of lies, so to speak, because, it would serve the established notion of gradualism, that things happen gradually and, and all this, as opposed to a possibility of, a catastrophe that happened, which the biblical flood may reflect, and other, the flood is something that a lot of, cultures across the world talk about. So it seems like it was something either catastrophic or very quick that happened that really changed our geography and just our world, basically. So what do you say to some of those theories as, that the Ice Age wasn't as long, or that, something very catastrophic happened, like a flood, that changed the course of history?
Oh, there's no question that there were catastrophic things happening. There were floods. And, every culture on Earth, apparently, even the Aborigines, have a flood history or whatever, what would be the correct word? Legend.
Account, legend, yeah.
Yeah. But we have a very good reason to believe that, these floods were the result of melting of the enormous glaciers that raised sea level 400 feet. So, we don't need a biblical flood, so to speak, to explain these legends. If one is going to be sort of hard-headed about it, the glacial meltdown is the best explanation. Then, the whole history of the Jews looks like it is highly suspect, that is to say, inaccurate. And the Jewish scholars have done this themselves, of doing very good work on finding out what's really going on, what really took place, what really didn't take place. But as I'm saying, my point of view is what I would call harsh philosophy. Is what does it take to survive? You can only do so much in your head over a period of time. You want to avoid input overload, and that's what we're subjected to continuously.
Sure. Now, if these Homo capensis, if they are in control and they've been influencing, political affairs, financial affairs, are they just, do they not have the same authority that they used to? Because I'm wondering if they really wanted to destroy humanity, couldn't they have done it much sooner? And then where did we come from? Why did they hit us?
Pets. We're their pets, where they run us. We're the herd. The word goyim or goy, it fits right in. So we should get back actually to what happened in Southern Africa, and this great area that is not studied. This is Adam's calendar and the Great Stone Ruins. There are huge stone ruins in Southern Africa. And Michael Tellinger has produced this marvelous book, Temple of the African Gods. The main virtue, I think, being these numerous fine photographs. And what you have here are a lot of structures which are stone silos. They're crude stone silos, the stones piled on top of each other. A lot of work went into piling up these stones. And these silos have no doors or windows. And the argument is put forward, well, the Anunnaki or whoever, they have created an energy system for getting energy out of the earth, out of this incredibly primitive piles of rocks. I think that it's more likely that these stone silos were plastered over with mud or something at that point, and were used as confinement cells for two-legged chattel. Now, what were those two-legged things? I think that probably at some point they were Homo sapiens. Whether there were other forms of hominids in there, who can say? Now, the interesting thing is this is close to Boskop, where this Homo capensis was found. There's evidence nearby that Homo capensis, or at least the big brain of what it was dominant over humans. Because at this one site, they found the human skeletons just casually thrown into the ground, and there was an elaborate tomb with a normal skeleton with a huge head facing the rising sun. And I think that's clear evidence that he was in charge and we weren't. And if you go to Paracas, Peru, it's much the same. The Coneheads had a burial situation in which they were wearing fine robes and in a special location, whereas the humans were very much less dignified in their internment. I think there's clear evidence that the big brains were in charge. And if you go into the South African thing, the Adam's calendar is made up of these stones, very crude stones that have been piled up. No artistic talent going on in there at all, but they've mapped out the heavens of Orions, and they're plotting the solstice and that sort of phenomenon. And then there is apparently a small pyramid there that is on the same line of longitude as the Great Pyramid in Giza. So it all kind of comes together that stuff started in southern Africa and spread out. And then you have the maps of mitochondrial Eve, which is supposedly the pathway of humanity. And this all comes up out of the same place, out of this approximate area of Boskop and the stone ruins. So what it's looking to me like at this point is that this southern area near Boskop, north of Boskop, and I guess it's in the Transvaal and the Orange state, if that's what it's called, could easily be the crucible of the development of Homo sapiens, of humanity. And our defining characteristics are really, the behaviors that make us worthwhile: empathy, compassion, ethics, adherence to the golden rule. This is really what humanity is all about. But if you look at the world, it's and these statements by Kennedy, J. Edgar Hoover, and Carl Jaspers, this is totally the reverse of what we have. Everything is psychopathic. There's a fabulous book. There are two fabulous books which I think put this together. One is Political Ponerology by Andrew Lobaczewski. I butcher his name. He's from Poland, but it basically they studied there in Poland the place of psychopathy in power, and it's that essentially we're run by psychopaths. If if you really start looking at the people who are in charge, they're devoid of any respect for the golden rule, for empathy, honesty, whatever. They're just, we live in a matrix of lies. Right. And this book, Political Ponerology, goes into detail. It's a very hard book. And, psychopathy is something we really should study in great detail, because we're in a position to be able to do so with the technology available. But we're essentially run by psychopaths. Right. Corporations are essentially psychopaths, on paper, and then when you encounter a lot of the men giving orders, they're psychopaths. Then there's this other book, Jeff Schmidt, on disciplined minds, on how everyone starts out with great intentions and then it just gets beaten down into this mush. Right. That follows the orders. All of this took a huge amount of time to put together. You see, it's almost like the natural world. Well, it is to our experience, but from my point, this has been developed over a very long period of time, probably thousands of years, and it may have been the mode of operation during the Ice Age in southern Africa. Should say something about circumcision too, because a number of people are looking at this, and the foreskin is just a little foreskin, but it apparently is highly significant in the bonding of a man to a woman, and that there are neurotransmitters and hormonal secretions, and it has significant societal effects if the population is circumcised. What I would, there's no rational reason to do. There's no reason to circumcise anyone. Yeah, well, maybe an individual case for something, but the population, it should not be circumcised. But what this looks to me like is a sign that the Jews have been captured. And and it's one of those things. It's like vaccinations. You try and fight vaccinations, the ideology comes right down on you. The whole thing comes down on you and attacks you. And right. Apparently circumcision is the same way. You say, well, I don't want to circumcise this kid, and they're after you. So that is kind of the way I'm looking at it this time. And I don't think you can trust the Bible, because it may have been written entirely to confuse us. Now, I'm not talking about the work of Jesus Christ, because he's primarily in ethics. And I think the Jefferson Bible, which is really just a few pages on the ethical teaching of Jesus Christ, is probably the major part of the whole thing, because it's about human beings interacting with other human beings. I don't think that you can, you have to be careful with demons or anything that's mysterious, because it might be there to confuse it. And we're in a very difficult situation now with the geoengineering. That's sure. In the material I sent you.
Yeah.
But we're getting close to major catastrophes. That California is going to be. Well, I mean, if it doesn't stop, if they don't stop the spraying out in the ocean and shut off the HAARP, California is going to essentially be gone in a couple of years.
Right. Real quick, because you touched on the ethics there, I have a question concerning, you talk about the defining characteristic of Homo sapiens, which is empathy, compassion, love, desire, and adherence to that golden rule. Where do you suppose that comes from? Because a lot of what the views, even though our worldviews may differ, we might agree that, it's better for us to show compassion, love, desire, all these things. Where do you think that moral objective foundation comes from?
What I think is that this arose, I mean, this is just purely my speculation.
Sure.
That this arose in the crucible in southern Africa, which I think might have been rather awful. The two-legged chattel who were tending the fields, and then there are a lot of gold mines there, doing the mining and who knows what else, and confined in these silos, if that's what it was. I think that the evolution of these human characteristics would have conferred a considerable advantage on those who had it, that they tried to take care of each other in an environment which was run by mathematicians.
Sure.
That's just what I'm speculating at this time, because
wouldn't that sort of suggest that these ethics are, in some sense, a subjective phenomenon, though, and not so much really grounded in any kind of external objective reality? And you kind of know what I'm getting at?
Well, I'm trying to figure that out, but it's like it confers a survival advantage to those who have it. For instance, I mean, if the psychopathic principles were put to rest, and we were running the world according to the golden rule, can you imagine how fabulous it would be? I mean, that's yeah. So there's the objective evidence that if a population is living that way, they do better. I mean, I think
however,
get them the money, the bankers out of it, and all this the other stuff, the things would reverse incredibly rapidly.
That is true. But however, if you look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, a lot of times it is the most ruthless and the most lacking of moral character that, puts these people on top. That oftentimes in a business situation or in a combat situation, those who fight dirty and those who do, who are not thinking about doing unto others as they would have done unto themselves, are the ones who, if you look at it from a Darwinian point of view, are the ones who survive. So it seems like that a sort of objective moral compass would be a detriment to at least an individual's ability to thrive in this sort of harsh world we live in.
Well, there's no doubt that very crooked, smart men, psychopaths, win. But if we talk about the system, the survival of the system as a whole, what we're looking at right now is no survival. We're looking at extinction of Homo sapiens, and maybe of a very special type of extinction, of a marked reduction of what's here, and essentially electronic and chemical control of what's left. let's see, the Georgia Guidestones said that what there should be a
500.
500,000 taking care of the earth. They didn't happen to mention the uproar, destruction of the glacial meltdown. Catherine Austin Fitts, who studied, the brilliant in economics, suddenly thought that, well, it looks like, everything is set up to reduce the population by 93%. And then a colleague of hers wanted to have lunch with her, and he had come up with the same thing independently. So you have three independent sources, if you can count the Guidestones, saying, a 93% on that order reduction. And with the mind control technology that we've got going on now, and then this heterodyning of EEG heterodyning, and the other stuff, obviously, it's not working. No matter how many jets you have, you're so rich, you actually have a formation of Gulf streams that you fly around in. Of course, you have to be in one, but I mean, people who are rich essentially have nothing, because the whole system is going down. And so it would appear to me that to be successful at this point, or those who are successful, are either criminally inclined or fools, but they're brilliant.
Right. Well, this has been actually very interesting talk, and I think there are a lot of things that we can agree on, and that we do hold to be sort of universal. And, there are other things that are just fundamental differences in our belief. But I'm glad that we were able to speak about these things and kind of get your take on the little cone-headed men, of course, and all sorts of other things. I'm going to give you the last word here, and then we can wrap it up because we're just about out of time.
Okay, well, my last word is that I think that we have a great potential, actually maybe on the transition, on turning things around. And Karen talked about that, getting the financial things straightened out, that the Homo capensis type large brain hominid is maybe the last screen between us and knowing about the monoparietal plate conehead, which I suspect is the dominant species on the planet. And is very much with us. And actually, this whole story is in science fiction movies. I'd like to take the time to go through the movies and analyze them. But the story is there in science fiction, and right. I'll just talk about two. One was the Man of Steel, in which they were talking about the kryptonites and versus the human, something on that order, and that what they said there that the mathematicians were the higher evolution, which right. I think is absolutely not true. It's the total reverse. And the other one, which is somewhat bothersome, is Oblivion, which something from outer space. It's always from outer space. Blew up the moon, which didn't make things go too well here on Earth. And what bothered me about that is the 9/11 stories. And Judy Wood, the buildings were dustified. Some technology, the Tesla technology, just sent them up in dust. The molecules were disassociated. So, and I've heard, I didn't capture someone that's saying, well, the technology is such that, you can blow a continent away. So I would say that they were telling us at that time that they could blow up the moon or blow up the Earth.
Right.
And I have to think that is probably true, because, nobody talks about really what happened to the Twin Towers in 9/11 more than the Twin Towers.
Right.
And it was way science fiction, and it's been there, long ago. Okay, I guess that's it for me.
Well, Dr. Edward Spencer, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and share your views with us. Keep us informed on any new things that you come up with, and maybe we'll talk to you again. Is there a place where people can find you and your things on the internet?
Not at this point. No,
okay.
It's stuff maybe at some point you can tell me how to get a blog going or something like that afterwards.
You're just laying low right now, huh?
Yeah, well.
All right, Dr.
There
Edwards.
are reasons I can talk about that.
Of course, there are always reasons. All right, Dr. Edward Spencer, thanks again so much one more time for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. You guys are great interviewers.
All right. Well, there you have it. That was a doozy, wasn't it, Gons?
I would say so, yes. Doozy would be a good word for it.
Dusenheimer.
Dusenheimer. Is that where that comes from?
It does.
Really?
I think. I believe it's called Dusenheimer. Yeah, it was a car.
Ah.
Nice car.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Can you, are you sure about that? Is that, are the sources correct? And
yes, the sources, I have all the sources there. I can put links in the show notes so you can all check that out. I'm actually going to make sure Duesenberg. That's what it is.
Duesenberg.
Wait, I think. I'm Googling right now. Here we go. Yep, Duesenberg. That's not Dusenheimer. Dusenheimer's the Jewish Duesenberg.
Oh, okay.
But I guess Duesenberg is already kind of Jewish. Anyways.
It's all covered up.
Anyways, it was a doozy.
It was a doozy.
Yeah. So there you go, everybody. Very interesting conversation. Probably one of the more difficult ones for us over here. I don't know. Difficult might be the wrong word, but it was a doozy. And so, like I said, there's probably a lot of stuff. A lot of you were like, Basil, Gons, come on, say something about this or that, or that sounds kind of fishy. But we didn't want to turn the conversation into a spirited debate at the time. So, what we're going to do is just address a couple things here after the interview, which might not be fair, but hey, it's our show. So there you go.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things in there that probably need to be addressed that I personally did not feel ready or it just kind of caught me off guard a little bit.
Sure.
First off, let's just make sure that we say that we enjoyed our conversation.
Absolutely.
As we always do. And we are very grateful for both Karen and Dr. Ed for coming on the show. And we respect them for what they're doing. And, but we just have some very fundamental belief systems that are differing. So there we go. That being said,
yeah, and it's important, I think, to point out where they do overlap because it's not a completely black and white issue here.
Exactly.
There are some things that we do agree with, but there are certainly some things that we don't. And one of the first things that I'm sure all of you listening noticed was that all the information that Karen was giving about the banks and all that was very fascinating. I thought it was very interesting.
Yes.
But when we tried to transition, or when we did transition from that to this whole Homo capensis thing, what she brought up was Akhenaten being Abraham.
Right.
And actually, have you heard about this whole idea, Basil, before today or before this interview?
I personally had not heard about it or didn't make the connections with it before. After hearing it and after looking into it, it did I was like, oh, I think I've seen this wandering around the internet before.
Sure. Yeah. I've actually ran into this probably about a year ago.
Right.
Was like, wait a minute, what does that mean for my faith? And,
right.
You always have kind of a moment of crisis, but then you sort of settle in and you sort of start looking at the evidence and you start looking at the arguments, and
then you remember this is the internet. So
this is
probably
the internet
should look
age.
into this a little bit.
Yeah. So like we mentioned during the conversation, there have been quite a bit of writing research done on this whole possibility. some of the books. I think the earliest one was in 1987 called Stranger in the Valley of the Kings, Solving the Mystery of an Ancient Egyptian Mummy. And there was a bunch. Moses.
Why don't you just real quick tell us who Akhenaten is? And
Sure. So Akhenaten was one of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. And a lot of depictions of Akhenaten have, sort of a feminine. It was supposed to be a man or male, but it has a feminine figure. Wide hips, that kind of thing. So maybe that might ring a bell for. It's kind of hard to describe it without seeing it, but
sure.
So there was, and there's, of course, internet age. There's rumors nowadays about how Obama is a clone of Akhenaten, and I mean,
nice.
it's pretty wild. So, but anyway, so Karen had mentioned that Akhenaten was Abraham. Now, trying to kind of do a little, research on some of that stuff, I didn't really find a whole lot on Akhenaten being Abraham. I did find people talking about how Akhenaten was Moses. And that's more of the, I guess, the alternative researchers. That's what they're saying, is that Moses and Akhenaten are the same person. And one of the leading people in that conversation was a fellow named Ahmed Osman. And he wrote a book that talked about this. And, he's sort of I guess you can call it like a pseudo-historian. He's trying to take some elements of both the Egyptian view and I believe, and I could be totally wrong, don't quote me on this, I believe he is a Muslim. So he takes the Quran as part of the whole, part of the whole puzzle, if you will.
Right.
And so he tries to put it all together, and he has a book called Stranger in the Valley of the Kings, and he makes an argument that Akhenaten and Moses are in fact one and the same.
Right.
So I reached out to some people that I know would have something to say about this, and one of them was Dr. Michael Heiser.
Oh, Mikey.
Yep, Mikey. And you guys have probably know Michael Heiser. He's pretty popular in our circles and whatnot. But he talked about, he sent me a link. He basically, in the email, he said, real briefly, he said, his evidence is unfounded. Nobody in, archaeology and in this field takes this theory seriously. And, this sparks the conversation. And I think sort of the premise of the entire conversation we had, which was, who do we trust? Do we trust the establishment or, these alternative researchers? And it kind of goes back and forth, right? It's a vicious cycle because on one hand, there is corruption in the establishment, right? The established academic scholarship. There's sort of, I guess, a veil or a suppression of certain information. And if you don't abide by certain things, then you won't, get your PhD. And, there's all that stuff going on.
Right.
But you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You can't say that everything is a cover-up. So,
right. Well, I mean, that's sort of the trap.
Right. So, and anyway, getting back to, I think that theme runs throughout the whole thing here. But basically, Dr. Michael Heiser sent me a link to a short article he wrote that I will link to as well in the show notes. And he quotes an Egyptologist, Donald Redford. And let me just read a very, very brief segment of what he said. He said, sadly, Mr. Osman has no new evidence to offer, nor any new reconstruction of history other than that which, at one time or another, has suggested itself to many an undergraduate, only to be dismissed upon sober reflection. I find myself wondering why Mr. Osman felt obliged to write a book at all. But he did write it, and my remarks are directed towards those who might be misled into taking it seriously. And he goes on to compare some of the, biblical accounts with even the Egyptian accounts and linguistic comparisons that are brought up by Osman. So again, that's just one angle that, that's one person talking about it from the other end. And so, do your own research and come to your own conclusions. But it is my opinion based on some of the things that I've read and the scholarship that I I guess I trust. I don't know. Is that
Right.
too strong of a word? Maybe, but that this theory that Akhenaten was Abraham or Moses is false. So
Right. Okay. All right. Well, there you go. Well, I mean, and throughout the interview, this is kind of the first example of sort of an underlying trend of anti-Semitism that one could sense listening to the interview. And I mean, Dr. Ed even kind of addressed it at one point in the interview, saying, you know, everybody gets on you for being anti-Semitic, but look at it, you know, look at the evidence or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not quoting him, but that was basically what I took from it.
And I think there's something to be said that, you know, it is difficult and it's kind of taboo to look at it. But even when you do look at it, it's biased. It's a biased approach. It's not always objective. So
right. And what's interesting is actually taking a look at some of Dr. Ed Spencer's sources that he quoted. A very strong anti-Semitic influence is throughout many or all of his sources.
Right. One of them he mentioned the book Synagogue of Satan by Andrew Carrington Hitchcock. I remember running into that book quite early on and sort of, you know, having my eyes being open to this whole realm. And basically the book starts off looking at Khazaria in around 740 AD, which is a land locked between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea.
Right.
And the theory goes that, you know, they were surrounded by, on one side, the Muslims and the other side, the Christians. And so, you know, the king of Khazaria, King Bulan, decided to adopt the faith of Judaism because the logic goes that if they do Christianity, then they'll be attacked by the Muslims. If they go Muslim, they'll be attacked by the Christians.
Right.
But if they convert to Judaism, then both sides would want to trade with them. And so according to the Synagogue of Satan, King Bulan decided to instruct his people to convert to Judaism. And, you know, the assumption goes that he was right and that he, you know, his land didn't get conquered. And so let me read this out of the book here, out of Synagogue of Satan, just to give you a feel. Quote, King Bulan was right. He would live to see his country unconquered, his people convert to Judaism enthusiastically and adopt the principles of the most holy Jewish book, the Talmud. Now, there's a little bit of issue there already because, you know, some of that could be refuted. You know, it's not necessarily the Talmud that is the most sacred book.
Yeah.
It's actually the Torah, the first 5 books, or the Pentateuch, as some would call it. But nevertheless, let's move on. He goes on, quote, he would not live to see his Asiatic race of converts to Judaism one day represent 90% of all the Jews on the planet and call themselves Ashkenazi Jews, when in fact they were not Jews, but simply an Asiatic race of people who converted to the Jewish religion whilst still continuing to speak the Khazarian language of Yiddish, totally different to the language of Hebrew. So, again, it works on this premise that there was a huge conversion of people to Judaism and that 90% of the people in the world are not actual Jews descended from you know, the Hebrew people.
Yeah.
And then he goes into a huge history of Jews that have been, he goes through about 1,000 years of history. He talks about the Rothschilds getting control and you know.
Right.
But one of the issues is that, you know, the book doesn't have a list of references to fact check a lot of these things. And there's actually, according to many people who have looked at this book, there's a lot of factual errors. There's historical distortions, and some of it are quite embarrassing, apparently. And, you know, so it turns out that it is really kind of an anti-Jewish book. It's anti-Semitic.
Right.
And, you know, while we understand that the Elders of Zion and Zionism has been something of a problem in the last century or so, you know, there's all kinds of conspiracy talk on that front. I would say that to then sum up this whole idea as, you know, the conspiracy, the Jews, the fake Jews are behind this whole thing, that the Illuminati are Jews and everybody behind the conspiracy are Jews.
Right.
That's just not founded per se. And also to add, Chris White did a video called The Khazar Myth Debunked, and he actually refutes Arthur Koester. He wrote a book called The 13th Tribe, where this whole idea of the Khazar Jews come from. And so I'll put a link to that video as well. And so for Dr. Ed to use Synagogue of Satan or mention that as a source for this whole premise behind the Homo capensis, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily founded and accurate, but nevertheless, let's move on.
Mm-hmm. And if all of that was enough, he did have one more source, which was Eustace Mullins, who was a writer, severely anti-Semitic and a Holocaust denier, actually. And he did a lot of expose on the Federal Reserve and things like that, and kind of some troubling things with Zionism. But at the same time, I mean, there's no denying just a really, really intense anti-Semitism. I mean, there's a quote from one of his books here, if I may read it.
Yeah, it's a book called The Biological Jew. It was written in 1968.
Right. It says, "We must remember that there is no Jewish crime per se, since the existence of the Jewish parasite on the host is a crime against nature, because its existence imperils the health of life of the host. This religious ceremony of drinking blood of an innocent Gentile child is basic to the Jew's entire concept of his existence as a parasite, living off the blood of the host. The Jews do not want anyone to know." I think this may be a new quote here, but
no,
the Jews...
It's the same.
It's the same thing?
Yeah.
"The Jews do not want anyone to know what Nazism is. Nazism is simply this, a proposal that the German people rid themselves of the parasitic Jews. The Gentile host dared to protest against the continued presence of the parasite and attempted to throw it off." The Biological Jew, 1968. 1968. That's pretty far. After that's a long time.
25 years after the war.
Exactly. So yeah, as you can see, I mean, this is this is not peppered with anti-Semitism. This is the whole shebang here.
Sure. Yeah, and he brings up the blood libel. I believe, I don't have the sources in front of me. This is difficult to do without sources. I believe in the 1500s or 1600s, there was a faction of Roman Catholics that accused the local Jews of drinking blood of children, basically, as part of their rituals. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because that's where some of the Golem myths arise from. Because there was a rabbi that apparently created a golem successfully,
right.
And the golem protected the Jews from the blood libel. So all things. Actually, that's one of the things I discuss in Age of Deceit too. Because of the whole golem issue. But in any case,
nice plug.
Yeah, I know, right? But in any case, yeah, there's a pretty substantial anti-Semitic feel to this, and.
So there you go. We just needed to address that. It made me a little uneasy during the interview, but that's wasn't something we were going to get into.
Sure.
Oh, and there was also the circumcision point that was brought up.
Yeah, this one was brought up at the end there. This is interesting. The claim that Dr. Ed brought up was that circumcision itself, that there's evidence that the foreskin contains certain hormones that, if you cut them off, then the society will basically be dumbed down, and, it's population control or a form of mind control in a sense. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the
stemming from the created by the Jews type thing.
Yes,
I can see where somebody would come to that. I mean, it makes a little bit of sense, just kind of when you think about the whole thought of what was it? I think it was the Navajo code breakers or scouts or something during the war, when they would bring these Native American in guys to be scouts, but then they would cut their hair, and then seemingly without their hair they would lose like their tracking power and stuff. So I mean, there's a lot of things that are kind of involved in like the removing of certain parts of the body, and sort of spiritual awareness, or
even just,
whatever,
even just from
sensory awareness.
Yeah, well, even just from sort of the evolutionist perspective, we've evolved a certain way for a certain reason, and
right.
Everything has a function except the spleen. But
right. Or even the creationist perspective, where
sure,
we were created this way for a reason.
Right, right. And the arguments against it, there's a lot of people that have talked about how it's it's mutilation, it's all this stuff. So I mean, the arguments is similar to other hot topic issues. Is one that's not talked about a whole lot publicly per se, but it is something that does exist. Now, interestingly, when you look at the scientific review of this stuff, Medical News Today, there's a whole lot of health organizations that have looked at this, and a lot of them say that there's more benefits than not. It's not super necessary to have the circumcision done, but there are certain medical or health benefits that come from it. And the thing is, it's like, okay, yeah, that's maybe true or not true or whatever, but and again, it kind of ties into this idea of who do you trust?
It's
do you
trust the establishment.
It's the establishment trying to...
Can't trust the establishment.
Right. Well, along those lines, there's a gentleman named Jean-Paul Turcade, or Turquid. I don't know. Turcade. He's an Australian geologist, and he did a study on the hormonal attacks and hormonal issue with circumcision, saying or he claimed that the circumcision attacks the endocrine system, and that's why it's not any good. And he kind of has a whole, and I'll have a link to this whole site on the show notes, but he goes into why this is all wrong. Now, interestingly,
wait, he's a geologist?
He's a geologist.
What is a geologist doing?
I don't know.
Okay.
But if you go to his website, he goes through all of the different effects and the attacks on the endocrine system and all the hormonal changes and genetic changes that occur because of the circumcision, and talks about how certain sensitive parts of the male thing there are removed. And so again,
that's a very mature way to put it. The male thing.
Anyway, so you go through his website and he talks about all kinds of things with the endocrine system, the hormones that are being manipulated and attacked. And, he even gets into the kosher diet and hormones and the different races and the different manipulation of all this stuff based on circumcision.
Uh-huh.
And so, okay, it looks kind of scientific, there's sort of some study and research done there or whatever. But then he starts getting into some very interesting things that doesn't really make sense, because he starts getting into chakras, okay? And that's a very Eastern nice kind of thing there.
Yeah.
And then he gets into why it's a whole section on the history of hormonal manipulation, religion and manipulation of society, and effects on the entire race and stuff like that. Yeah. And he has this quote, "The discovery of mine is of great importance indeed, that all my mining discoveries and geological discoveries, and I'm handing it out free of charge for the bettering of humanity, and as my Knight Templar's standard requires me to do. Of course, the case is well documented, and at this point in time, this is my duty indeed to impact the knowledge of humanity at large. It shows that the whole Semite, JIC, Jew, Islamic, Christian, sects are in fact a complete fraud, and the matter of importance in the Jew system have been carefully put out of reach of the common." End quote.
Okay. That is weird.
Right. So
what a weird thing to say.
Yeah, so, I mean, my whole thing was like, okay, if you want to make a case against circumcision, you don't have to necessarily start going after, the Old
Jews
Testament
in
and
general.
the Jews. Yeah, I mean, I get it. That's where, the circumcision thing comes from and all that. But so anyway, again, I think the overall premise here is that who do you trust? The establishment or these alternative researchers that are trying to throw down the established orthodox science?
Right. Or us.
Or us, because we're part of the establishment.
We're so established.
Right.
All right.
So
okay, that's enough about the snip. That was a lot of snipping. Okay, but so just to wrap up here, one last thing. One of the more concerning things that was said was about the Council of Nicaea and an alleged 300 books burned. And that was one. I mean, I went to a school where the Council of Nicaea was quite thoroughly covered, and it's just part of the education that I received, and I had never heard anything about this. And that's not to say that the establishment wasn't trying to keep it away from me. However, this just didn't make a lot of sense to me, that I had never even heard of this, even in a rumor form.
Right. Well, it's hard to track down this idea of who said this first. And
right.
We live...
And just for those who did not get the education that some of us did, the Council of Nicaea was a council brought together to in 325 CE, where they got together and decided what was going to be in the Bible, like which books were included.
Sure. There was discussion about Jesus's deity. That was sort of the main topic. But
right, they kind of just got together and worked all of this out.
Yeah. And again, this is close to 300 years after the time of Jesus. And so you have New Testament writings already floating around. You have early church fathers already talking about the gospel.
Right.
It was well established, but not, I guess, institutionalized. That might be the right word. So, and some people will say, oh, there it is, it was institutionalized, therefore it is evil. And again, it's not so black and white. I think there's a little bit of gray area. It was good because in one sense, it's what we have now, but at the same time, I guess you could call it bad because certain books were omitted or whatever.
Right, but at the same time, you got to think of the Gnostic Gospels. Those easily could have been included in the Bible, but and let's get this straight: the Council of Nicaea was not like a secret thing happening. Like,
sure, yeah, it was very.
It was
public.
not a secret. This was like all the Christians getting together, being like, "Hey, you know what? We should probably talk about some of this stuff. Like, we should probably figure out, what's really happening here."
And don't, even modern science does this kind of thing, right? It's sort of a vetting process.
Right.
Anyway, so Karen had claimed that 300 books were burned to cover up Homo capensis.
Right.
And so, I tried to track down this source. Where is she getting this information from? And I don't know if I have the original source, because we're in the internet age. The gap between a source and where it ends up on your computer screen, I mean, who knows? However, based on what I was able to track down, the whole thing was started on the internet in a forum back in like 2002 or something like that, where someone mentioned, there were debates going on, and someone mentioned, well, they burned 300 books to cover up for whatever.
Right.
And so there's one
with no source.
There's no source. Yeah, no source.
Like, you'd think if something happened thousands of years ago, like you got to have a reason to think that. Like maybe some really disgruntled employee of the Council of Nicaea, like made a note and was like, "Oh, I'll take them down." But that didn't happen. We cannot find a source for this.
Right. And so here's what we do know is that during the Council of Nicaea, the work of Arius, where we get Arianism. Am I saying that right?
Arianism.
Arianism. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, which
Okay.
is an unsavory belief system.
Right.
Generally.
This is where I believe you get some of the ideas, the Aryan race and that sort of thing. Is that, yeah, okay. So that was thrown out, and the works of Arius was burned. And actually, it was burned for an extensive amount of time, for about 5 years, which is quite a long time to be burning books. But the idea survived, and obviously it's around now. And there's various factions and cults and even political institutions throughout history who have adhered to the Arianism ideology. So even though the books were burned, the idea remains. And which speaks to another point, that if there is a true cover-up of this Homo capensis, which again is another sort of leap of faith, right? First you have to believe this guy on the internet that said something 12 years ago. And then leap number 2 is that the cover-up itself was actually for the Homo capensis, right? So that's 2 leaps of faith.
Right. The point was that it was mentioned that 300 books were burned at the Council of Nicaea, and the answer is there is no source for that we are aware of.
And the only thing we do know is that Arius's books were burned. Maybe 300 books written by Arius were burned.
Maybe. Yeah, but books, burning Arius's books may not be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah. Another just side note, based on, the whole idea of the Bible being manipulated and stuff being added. One of the things that Karen had mentioned was that the rapture was added in the Bible. Now, I don't want to get into a whole pre-trib, mid-trib conversation, because there is there is some people who say that the pre-trib rapture was not truly developed until the late 1800s by a Jesuit named Darby. And I don't want to get into all that right now, but the word rapture doesn't appear in the Bible to begin with. So, to say it was added is sort of a misdirection. The word rapture comes from the Latin word rapturo. So if you have the Latin Vulgate version of the Bible, you will see the word rapturo in there. And it actually is translated from the Greek word harpazo, which means I seize, snatch, obtain. And the most popular verse where you find that word is 1 Thessalonians 4:17, where it says, "Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord." And the word caught up is harpazo, which was translated in the Latin to rapturo, which is where we get the word rapture. So
there you go. You know what other word isn't in the Bible? Trinity.
Yep, Trinity.
Yeah, see? So there you go. The word rapture not being in the Bible, A, not completely correct, B, moot.
Exactly. So yeah, those were some of the things that were brought up that we wanted to address here briefly. There's obviously a lot more that could be said. There's topics that we didn't touch on per se. I will have things in the show notes. For example, Ponerology, the Study of Evil by Andrew Lobazowski.
Yeah.
Some interesting things there that Dr. Ed brought up. Also, this idea of the Homo capensis, the extraterrestrial thing being a cover-up for the Homo capensis. Dr. Ed mentioned a letter written by Dr. or I don't know if he's a doctor, but Robert Broom. It was a letter that was written in 1918. It was about the Boskop skull. And I actually inquired Dr. Aaron Judkins, our archaeologist friend, and he put together a little PDF that a link will be in the show notes for that. What else was there? I don't
know. All sorts of stuff. Just make sure to go to canarycryradio.com and check out the show notes for this show.
Oh, one last thing. The Charles Hapgood, the maps of the ancient kings, the whole idea of the Piri Reis map and all that. So,
right. You will see that there.
Yes.
So go check that out. Okay, well, I think that just about fills our time even more here. So, hi, everyone. Welcome to Canary Cry Radio long version.
Oh, come on. Dr. Future was longer than this.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, we can just leave this whole part out. I don't even know where I was just talking just to talk. Okay, so there it is, everybody. Make sure to go to canarycryradio.com, do the show notes like we've said. Also, we have the support tab there. Very nice tab for everybody. We thank you, all of those who have already helped us out. We are enormously thankful. But if you haven't yet and you feel like the Lord is tugging on you to help out the Canary Cry Radio Ministry project thing, you can go to the support tab. You can sign up for a small monthly donation or give a one-time donation in any amount. Make sure to find us on Facebook. Press the like button. Stay updated. Also Twitter and all those things. Maybe we should get a Pinterest. You want to get a Pinterest, Gons?
Yeah, there was somebody that actually mentioned that we should do that because your artwork, your beautiful artwork would go a long way on Pinterest. Or what was the other one that's art-based?
I don't know. But there you go. We're not on Pinterest, but maybe someday. Also, go on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to us. Go ahead and give us a thumbs up or a star, and especially a review. We just love reading those reviews. So if you have something nice to say, or not, I guess, then you can go ahead and do that. And we will read it, and we will feel all warm and cozy inside, or just completely betrayed. So, there you go. Make sure to catch the next episode of Canary Cry Radio. But until then, think outside.
Thank you.